On May 13, 2026, a judge walked into a courtroom in Park City, Utah, and handed down a sentence that removed every remaining question about what the rest of Kouri Richins' life would look like. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Not a reduced term, not a path to a hearing somewhere down the road. No countdown, no exit date, no way out. Just the rest of her life, inside, with no mechanism to change that. And the story of how that morning unfolded, what was said in that courtroom, who said it, and what it all means going forward, is the chapter that most coverage of this case never fully told. That date carried a weight that went beyond the legal proceeding itself. May 13, 2026 was not just sentencing day. It was Eric Richins' birthday. He was born on May 13, 1982. He would have turned 44 years old that morning. Instead, his father, his sisters, and his extended family sat in those courtroom rows waiting to speak on his behalf. Because Eric Richins had been gone since March 4, 2022, when he was found unresponsive inside his home at the age of 39. A toxicology report confirmed he had fentanyl in his system at a concentration 5 times the level considered lethal. If you are watching this for the first time and want to follow along as we continue building cases like this one from verified court records and documented facts, this is the place to do it. Subscribe to Midnight Evidence right now so you do not miss a single part of this documentary. And if this story is already hitting you the way it hits everyone who follows it closely, go ahead and leave a like. It helps more people find this work. Now let us go back inside that courtroom, because what happened before the sentence was delivered is the part that deserves its full weight. Kouri Richins sat at the defense table in a lime green jail uniform. She had been held at Summit County Jail since her arrest in May of 2023. For nearly 3 years, the legal process had moved through its stages: motions, hearings, delays, and then a trial that lasted 3 weeks and concluded on March 16, 2026, when 8 jurors returned a unanimous verdict after roughly 3 hours of deliberation. Guilty on every count: aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder, 2 counts of insurance fraud, forgery, 3 weeks of testimony, more than 40 witnesses, and the jury needed approximately 3 hours to reach a unanimous decision on all 5 counts. Now it was sentencing day, and Judge Richard Mrazik had 2 options before him: 25 years to life, or life without the possibility of parole. Before he made that decision, the court heard from the people who knew Eric Richins. His father, Gene Richins, stood and described the man his son had been: a devoted father, a youth soccer coach, someone who gave himself fully to his family and his community. Gene told the court that Eric's soccer team still breaks its huddle to this day by saying, "1, 2, 3, Eric." He asked the judge to ensure that the woman convicted of taking his son's life never walked free again. Eric's sister, Katie Richins Benson, addressed the judge directly. She asked him to protect her nephews from spending any part of their futures looking over their shoulders. She told the court that only a permanent sentence could give those boys the kind of safety they deserved. And then the courtroom heard something that no standard summary of this case has ever fully captured. 3 therapists walked to the podium. Not 3 boys, 3 therapists. Eric and Kouri Richins had 3 sons together. At the time of sentencing, those boys were 13, 11, and 9 years old. Each one of them had written a victim impact statement. Each one had made a deliberate choice about how his words would reach the court, and not one of them chose to stand there in person. They trusted mental health professionals to carry their words into that room and read them exactly as written. Therapist Jessica Black addressed the court before the reading began. She told Judge Mrazik that their role was to deliver the boys' words precisely as the boys had written them. She said the boys wanted the court and the world to hear their side. That phrase, the world, was not accidental. These were children who understood the weight of what they were saying and chose to say it anyway. The oldest son, Carter, was 13 at the time of sentencing. He had been 9 years old when his father died. He had spent 4 years living inside the aftermath of that morning, through the arrest, through the trial, through the headlines, through all of it. When his words were read aloud, he did not describe missing the way things used to be. He did not express hope that circumstances might change. He said he does not miss how his life once was. And when it came to his mother, he was direct. He does not miss Kouri. Those are not the words of a child who was coached toward a particular outcome. Those are the words of a child who had 4 years to arrive, entirely on his own, at exactly how he felt. The middle son, Ashton, was 11 at sentencing. He had been 7 years old when his father died. His statement did not leave room for interpretation. He told the court that Kouri had taken everything from him and his brothers, that she had put herself first, that she had placed other people ahead of her own family. And then he said something that stopped the room. He said he would not feel safe if she were ever released. Not uncertain, not uncomfortable, unsafe. An 11-year-old child, speaking through a therapist, telling a judge that his own mother being free would make him feel unsafe. The youngest son, Weston, was 9 years old at sentencing. He had been 5 years old when Eric Richins died. At 5, a child is just beginning to form a stable understanding of home, of routine, of the people they can count on. Weston was at precisely that stage of development when everything around him collapsed. His statement, read aloud by his therapist in front of a filled courtroom, carried the kind of clarity that only comes from a child who has not yet learned to soften what he means. He said if she ever got out, he would be scared, he would be angry, he would not want to go near her, and then he said what he wanted. He wants her in jail forever. The room held that. These statements were not shaped by legal strategy. They were not filtered for tone or reviewed for courtroom effectiveness. They were written by 3 children sitting somewhere outside that building, trusting adults to carry what they could not say in person. And every single one of them, in his own words, said the same thing. Keep her there. These words came from her own children. That is the part of this case that no headline and no verdict announcement has ever been able to fully carry. After the impact statements were read, Kouri Richins was given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing. She took it. For approximately 30 minutes, she stood at that podium and spoke directly to her sons, even though they were not in the room. She told them she loved them. She told them she understood their anger and that it was okay to feel it. She asked them not to give up on her. She told them to be like their father. She told them to find peace. She also acknowledged publicly, for the first time, that she had been involved in an extramarital affair during her marriage to Eric. She admitted she had lied to him. She told her sons that when they are older and build their own relationships, they must never lie to someone they love. But through every message she directed at her boys, through every piece of advice, through every moment she stood at that podium, she never once said she was responsible for Eric's death. Not once. She called the accusation against her an absolute lie. She said she would not accept responsibility for something she did not do. She said the accusation was just as unreasonable to her on that morning as it had been 4 years earlier. And then, just before Judge Mrazik prepared to deliver his sentence, Kouri Richins looked toward where her sons would have been sitting and said 3 words, "I am coming home." Judge Richard Mrazik then delivered his sentence. He had heard Gene Richins describe a hole in a family that would never close. He had heard Katie Richins Benson ask him to protect 3 boys from spending their lives afraid. He had heard Kouri Richins spend 30 minutes denying everything and promising to return. He had heard, through 3 therapists, what those children actually wanted. His words from the bench were measured, and they were final. He said that a person convicted of doing what Kouri Richins was convicted of doing, in the way it was done, for the reasons it was done, causing the kind of loss now permanently woven into the lives of 3 boys and an entire family, is simply too dangerous to ever be free. Life in prison without the possibility of parole on the aggravated murder conviction. The remaining counts carried additional consecutive sentences. No fines were imposed. Within hours, Kouri's legal team announced they would appeal and seek a new trial. That process will take years. Legal analysts have consistently described the appellate challenge as exceptionally difficult, given what the conviction rests on: cell phone records, housekeeper testimony regarding the acquisition of controlled substances, a toxicology report confirming fentanyl in Eric's system at 5 times the lethal concentration. Overturning a conviction built on that foundation is not impossible, but it is rare. And while that process works through the courts, Kouri Richins is not waiting in any kind of suspension. She is serving her sentence. Every morning she wakes up inside that facility. The appeal has not changed anything yet. When that gavel came down on May 13, 2026, something shifted that went beyond the legal ruling. The word forever stopped being abstract and became a daily condition, and the question that most coverage moved past too quickly is the one worth sitting with. What does that actually look like from the inside? That is where this documentary is going next. If you want to be there for every part of this story as it continues to develop, subscribe to Midnight Evidence right now. Every new chapter of this case will be covered here with the same level of depth and the same commitment to verified facts that you just heard in this one. Leave a like if this reached you. It matters more than you might think. When a sentence of life without the possibility of parole is handed down, the legal story ends. The courtroom empties. The coverage moves on. The headline gets filed. But for the person walking through those doors and into a facility with no release date attached to her name, nothing has ended. Everything has just begun, and the reality of what begins on the other side of those doors is far more layered, far more psychologically complex, and far more consequential than any headline ever accounts for. Inside the Utah State Correctional Facility, the structure of daily life is absolute. The day begins at 5 in the morning. Not because anyone considered a preference or accommodated a schedule, because the facility's routine says 5, and the facility's routine does not negotiate. Meals happen at fixed times in designated spaces. Movement from one part of the building to another requires authorization. Every transition passes through controlled checkpoints. There is no stepping outside for a moment without clearance. For someone who spent years running her own real estate business, setting her own calendar, driving through the Wasatch Mountains on her own terms, that shift in daily architecture carries a psychological weight that corrections researchers have documented extensively. Removing personal autonomy, even in the smallest daily decisions, has a measurable impact on how a person processes time, identity, and their own sense of self. But for Kouri Richins, the structure is only part of the picture. What makes this sentence heavier than routine alone is what is entirely absent from it. For most people serving time, the prison system operates on a fundamental motivational principle. Behavior determines outcome. Follow the rules, maintain a clean disciplinary record, demonstrate rehabilitation, and that record can work in your favor at a parole hearing. Accumulate good time credits. Build towards something. There is a mechanism, however distant, however uncertain, that connects daily choices to the possibility of a future outside those walls. Kouri Richins has no such mechanism. She is serving life without the possibility of parole. There is no parole hearing being prepared for. There is no release date to work toward. There is no reduction in sentence available for good conduct in the traditional sense. The legal architecture of her sentence has removed the primary motivational framework that governs most incarcerated people's daily choices, and that absence creates a psychological condition that corrections professionals and researchers have identified as one of the most difficult challenges facing people serving permanent sentences. The question becomes immediate and unavoidable. If there is nothing to work toward, what is the reason to follow the rules at all? The answer, as documented in long-term incarceration research, is not abstract, it is intensely practical. The alternative to good behavior is not neutrality. The alternative is measurably worse. Prison systems structure daily life around a tiered privilege model. Work assignments, commissary access, phone call privileges, recreation time, gym access, programming participation, and visiting privileges are not guaranteed conditions. They are earned through consistent conduct and lost through violations. A person who maintains a clean record can access these elements of daily life. A person who accumulates disciplinary reports loses them, one by one, until what remains is a cell and nothing else. Beyond lost privileges, serious or repeated violations carry the consequence of administrative segregation, solitary confinement, a single cell, severely restricted movement, minimal human contact, meals delivered through a slot in the door. The psychological literature on prolonged isolation is consistent and stark. Extended periods in solitary confinement are associated with severe deterioration in mental health, including increased rates of anxiety, depression, hallucinations, and cognitive impairment. It is confinement within confinement. It is a condition that corrections professionals across the field have described as among the most damaging experiences available within a prison environment. So even without a parole date, even without the traditional motivational architecture of earned release, the daily calculation remains real. Good conduct means access to work, to other people, to movement, to small measures of normalcy that make the difference between a day that is bearable and a day that is not. It means 75 cents a day in prison wages, which translates into commissary purchasing power, access to items beyond what the facility provides, a degree of autonomy within a system designed to eliminate it. It means phone calls, limited, monitored, scheduled, but voice contact with anyone on the outside who will still answer. For someone serving a permanent sentence, that phone call may be the only thread connecting her to the world she left behind. The psychological trajectory of long-term incarceration is something corrections researchers and clinical psychologists have studied in documented detail. In the earliest period following arrival, the dominant experience is typically shock and disorientation. The mind resists the reality it is being forced to absorb. The gap between the life that existed before and the conditions of the present is too wide for immediate processing. Coping mechanisms have not yet developed. The person is still fighting against what has happened rather than adapting to it. As years accumulate, a process of adjustment typically begins. The incarcerated person learns the rules, the rhythms, the social architecture of the facility. They establish routines. They find their place within the structure. This adjustment is not acceptance, it is functional navigation. The person has learned how to move through their day without the full psychological weight of their situation crushing every hour. But researchers identify a critical shift that tends to occur somewhere between 5 and 10 years into a permanent sentence. The reality of permanence becomes undeniable at a cellular level. The mind can no longer sustain the psychological buffer of treating the sentence as temporary, as something that might change, as a condition that will eventually resolve. The permanence settles. And at that point, according to the documented literature, a person serving life without parole faces one of the most significant psychological crossroads of their incarceration. They either reach a form of acceptance and begin constructing a meaningful life within the constraints of their sentence, or they deteriorate under the weight of a future they cannot change. The individuals who navigate long-term sentences without severe psychological deterioration as documented across corrections research and supported by the accounts of mental health professionals who work inside these facilities, tend to share certain behavioral patterns. They engage consistently with available programming. They build genuine social connections within the facility. They take on roles that carry responsibility, mentorship, work leadership, educational participation. They access mental health services not as a last resort, but as an ongoing tool. They create structure within the structure. They find ways to contribute to something beyond their own survival. These are not philosophical choices. They are practical, documented survival strategies that have been identified repeatedly in the research literature on long-term incarceration. The individuals who deteriorate follow a different pattern, equally documented. They disengage from programming. They accumulate disciplinary violations. They isolate. They spend their cognitive and emotional energy on resentment, on relitigating what brought them there, on a narrative of injustice that consumes decades without producing anything. The research is consistent on what that path produces. It produces psychological damage that compounds over time, rather than stabilizing. For Kouri Richins, the psychological burden of her specific circumstances carries a weight beyond the general conditions of a permanent sentence. She was 36 years old at the time of her sentencing. The 3 boys she shares with Eric Richins were 9, 11, and 13. If she lives into her 80s, she will spend more years inside that facility than she spent in freedom. Her sons will grow up, form their own lives, potentially have their own families, and the entirety of that trajectory will unfold without her present. She will not attend graduations. She will not be at weddings. She will not meet grandchildren. The severing from her children, who each told a judge through their therapists that they do not feel safe when they think about her being free, is not a condition that is likely to resolve quickly, if it resolves at all. The mental health resources available inside the Utah State Correctional Facility include therapy, psychiatric services, grief counseling, and structured programming. Whether and how an incarcerated person engages with those resources is a choice that plays out daily, not once, not at intake, but every single day, for however many years the sentence runs. The corrections literature is clear that the inmates who access mental health services consistently and proactively fare significantly better over the long arc of a permanent sentence than those who treat those resources as optional or irrelevant. The question of what 50 years inside actually produces is not one that resolves in a courtroom. It does not resolve in a headline. It does not resolve in a sentencing transcript. It resolves, slowly, across decades of daily choices made by one person inside a facility with no exit date attached to her name. Whether those choices compound into something resembling a life or dissolve into something that merely passes time is a question that the research can frame but cannot answer in advance. What the research can say, and what the documented record of long-term incarceration consistently shows, is that the sentence does not stand still. It moves. It changes the person it is attached to. The only variable is the direction of that change. And for a woman who stood at a podium on her late husband's birthday and told her absent children she was coming home, the distance between that statement and the reality of what her life now looks like is not a gap that closes with time. It is a gap that the next 50 years will have to be lived inside of, one morning at a time, beginning at 5 o'clock, in a facility that does not adjust its schedule for anyone. That is the reality this case leaves behind when the cameras move on and the coverage ends. Not a verdict, not a sentence, a life, the entire rest of one. Behind walls that do not move, attached to a name that will not appear on any release list, inside a system that will still be running its 5 o'clock wake, when every other detail of this story has faded from the news cycle. If this documentary reached you the way this case deserves to be told, make sure you are subscribed to Midnight Evidence. Every case we cover is built from verified records, documented facts, and the kind of depth that the headline never has room for. Hit that subscribe button now. Leave a like if this story stayed with you, and stay with us, because the cases we cover next carry the same weight, and we are not done yet.